I'm glad you got to get a drink and move. I can tell you in the sailing jacket it's actually quite warm in here, and I'm feeling the heat. But you'll figure out why that is in a moment. So my talk is about 3 winners and 3 losers. That's not quite right. They're not people, but there are 3 instances of winning and 3 instances of losing in this talk. And the reason I'm kind of showing you this is because I want to answer the question, or have a discussion about the answer to the question, what is high performance? So I'm Dennis Mansell. I'm an agile coach. I've worked at many different companies, quite big, quite small, so really small, like I had a startup, there were 5 of us. I worked down the road here at Booking.com, that's I think 5,000 people in tech, almost 20,000 people working in the entire company. And that's actually quite strange that the companies pay me to come and work for them, because well, basically what I do is I come and try and change their mindset about something. And I know we talk about these agile transitions, and we've also got a whole load of stuff on here in terms of very kind of fixed structural things that we're going to change, or fixed item things that we're going to change, statics, let's say. I actually approach these things more by highlighting, okay, apparently we're kind of pre-programmed with a certain mindset, we call it here the industrial mindset, whereas where agility really comes into the fore is when you build up a system that works. And I'm going to use an analogy in a moment that's going to make this clear. But basically, let's call it the explorer mindset. You also have the agile mindset, but basically it comes down to we have people that we're making stuff for, customers, we have teams that make the stuff, and we keep iterating and changing how we work and changing what we work on continuously, and that's agile. Right, so I'm that little kid on the left. So when I was 6 years old, I was at school, and I really wondered what I was doing there. So I would sit there in class, and somebody would be telling me things, and it was clear that they thought I could think quite well, so they were trying to educate me into becoming a thinker, and I was always looking out the window and thinking, what am I doing here? I could be playing outside with my friends. And that lasted a while. It lasted all the way into my studies. I studied social psychology, and eventually I just gave up and said, okay, I'm going to make my work out of going outside and playing with my friends. So how did I end up as an agile coach? Because now I actually work in an office and wear neat clothes, and well, it doesn't always feel like I'm playing outside with my friends. But actually, it's a lot more like playing outside with your friends than you might realize. We're all very programmed. I'm not sure if I can go back. Yes, I can. We're very much programmed already at school to think in this way. And this way is basically, we have people, they're static things, they're cogs in the machine, let's say. If you have the best people, you'll get the best results. Not quite, because if you just have the best people and you put them all in a room, then they're not going to do anything. So you need some real thinkers. You need to split the doers and the thinkers. So you need real strong doers and really clever thinkers. And the clever thinkers then come up with a plan. And then the plan, that's going to lead to performance. So if you have the perfect plan, you basically stick to the plan, work really hard, and then at the end you win. Well, that's not really how it works in sailing, and it's definitely not how it works for exploring. So I'm going to take, I think, one of the most well-known examples of exploring, and we're going to use that analogy to see what I mean. So in the industrial mindset, there's one solution, and it's about winning that solution. People plus plans is performance. For an explorer, that's not really the case. There are a lot of solutions, and they're actually so difficult to find that you need other people. So you don't really need people, you need teams. So it's the interactions between the people, not the people. You need a challenge, because you need to go out and explore something. Otherwise, again, you're just going to sit around and wonder what you're doing there. But it's about learning. It's not really about winning, it's about what did I learn. So here's the example. So the example is the South Pole expedition in 1910. So on the left here is Robert Falcon Scott. He is the hero of this story. He joined the Royal Navy at the age of 13. He was a member of a middle-class family, but that had a long history of military history. So his father, or his grandfather, had been a captain. He had uncles who were in the army and the navy. And when he was going up through the ranks, he became lieutenant, which is quite a climb from a cadet. And the problem was that his father went bankrupt, and he was the only breadwinner of the family. And lieutenants don't earn very much money, so he had to find a way of becoming a captain to get that promotion and to get a ship. And once you were actually on a ship as a captain, you earn quite a lot of money, and you'd be able to supply for his family. So he went out to look for naval vessels that he could command. But the only thing he could command was a vessel called the Discovery, HMS Discovery, and that was on its way to the South Pole, and they were going to do some Antarctic exploration. They were going to set up a base there, and they were going to see if they could get up on the Ross Ice Shelf. So he joined that ship as, I think, still as a lieutenant, was made a captain during the expedition. But the expedition was at a time, let's say just at the beginning of the 20th century, where the British Empire was crumbling, and they were looking basically for these heroes. They needed people that were, you know, a stalwart of the English identity, these great heroes that were stronger than nature and had proved themselves. So when he came back, he was a hero. He was the first person to discover parts of the Ross Ice Shelf, and he'd made his way into Antarctica, and he'd had a very hard walk towards the South Pole. They tried to get south. Hadn't worked, but at least he'd given it his best. And he'd returned, and basically he was feted in the newspapers and became a socialite. And he even married this lady, Kathleen Bruce, who was totally above his class, but now he was a British hero. Now, Kathleen Bruce wanted him to keep being a hero, so she kind of cajoled him into his next expedition, which is the Terra Nova expedition. Now, because he was so famous, he decided, okay, I'm going to be able to get a lot of money in, and he did. He got lots and lots of money. Luckily, there was another expedition to the South Pole, which also failed, so the South Pole still hadn't been captured yet. And so eventually there were 8,000 applicants to join this expedition, and he selected the best 65. So there was basically all of the people he could get on the Terra Nova expedition, or on the ship, the Terra Nova. He hired them all, but they were absolutely the cream of the crop. So they were the strongest soldiers, the most up-and-coming officers, the world's best geologists, meteorologists, scientists that would do exploration. They're all very fit. So it's all about these absolutely fantastic individuals. So he got the perfect people, and he was on his way to the South Pole. Unluckily for him, so were these guys. So these are 8 Norwegians. Here they're on board the Gjøa, which is a small fishing vessel. And these guys basically spent all of their life trying to become polar explorers. And they finally succeeded. They'd taken this small fishing boat around the northwest passage of Canada. And so they discovered the first sea link from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean. And they were famous for it because there had been a lot of expeditions that had actually failed, and some of them had failed spectacularly, one being the British expedition. So people were kind of interested, but they were also a bit disappointed that these 8 kind of, fishermen and navigators and really not very high society types from Norway, so like Viking, not fully civilized people, that they'd managed to do that. Now, none of these guys were the best at anything. Well, I think one of them was quite good at Nordic skiing. But they could all do carpentry, they could all navigate. They, like I said, spent like years and years with the Sami and the Inuit people in the North Pole region. So they knew as much as you could know about surviving in those conditions. They knew each other really well. So they mastered the art of exploration, but yeah, they weren't the world's best, definitely not. So I'd say, you know, if I was a betting man, I would say Scott's got the upper hand here. There are 19 of these Norwegians, 8 of whom are going to actually do the expedition, versus 65 of the world's best heading for the South Pole. So they also had quite a different approach to planning, these two groups. So Scott, I'll take an example. So this thing you see down here is called a Nansen sled. It's basically a sled that you pull across the snow, and in this case, this is the Norwegian version, so they used sled dogs, huskies. But the English had, of course, much more. So they had sled dogs, and they had horses, and they had motor, like tractors, basically. And they also had these special harnesses that they could man-haul the sleds to the South Pole. And there's a problem with the sleds, because basically Antarctica is about 10 degrees colder than the North Pole. It's really cold. And the problem is, well, basically a sled works like this. You've got these two runners, they're like skis, and they, by putting some pressure on them, a microscopic film of water appears under each runner. And so as you pull it, it basically melts a bit of snow and it runs along. That's why it slides. So if you've ever been skiing, you're actually skiing on water. You're not skiing on the snow. Until it gets really cold. So when it's really cold, that water does not appear. What happens is it feels like pulling a sled through the sand. In fact, that's literally what Scott said. He said, yeah, there's something wrong with our sleds. It feels like we're pulling them through the desert. So what did Scott do about this? Well, he basically said, okay, I've got these sleds, I've got all of this stuff to pull them. What we're going to do is we're just going to work harder. So we're going to send everybody towards the South Pole with all of the sleds we've got, and we're just going to kind of brute force it, stick to the plan. This was the plan, we've been planning this for 2 years, just pull harder, and we'll get to the South Pole. The Norwegians said, okay, so it seems that we have a problem with the sleds. What can we do? Well, we can do two things. We can make them even lighter, so they stripped off any little bits that they thought were unnecessary. They knew it was quite flat because they had a depot laying expedition in the first summer. And they realized, okay, so what we'll do is we'll just make really light sleds. That makes the friction at least a bit less. But the other thing was, they'd spend a lot of time with the Inuit. And the Inuit do come across circumstances where it's so cold that the sleds freeze to the snow. And what do? Well, they melt a bit of snow into water, pour it on the runner, that forms an ice layer on the runner, and then it basically acts like a kind of solid lubricant. It scrapes off the ice, and they run much more easily, which means you can still use your dogs to really make a pace across the snow. So Scott had all of the stuff. He had a really good, well-planned expedition. However, what Amundsen's expedition, so the Norwegian expedition, did was to have a very simple plan and one that they could adapt. So they were actually iterating on how to plan. They were sticking to the plan. So who won? Do you know the story? It's quite a well-known story. So Amundsen got to the South Pole. He was the first. He got there on the 14th of December. Found a big white plain with nothing there, which is what you want to find. And he put a tent down. He made circles to make sure that he was the first to cross the South Pole. Waited for a bit. No one appeared. So they headed back to their expedition home. And it's quite interesting. They actually weighed themselves when they left Framheim, their base camp. And then they weighed themselves when they got back, and they put on a bit of weight because moving every day in the fresh air, it makes you more healthy. Scott died. So Scott, yes, but also very tragic. So he'd stuck to the plan, and his tractors had broken down. After that, his ponies died. After that, his men started dying, and he ended up on the Ross ice shelf, frozen in a tent. And it was so late in the season, in fact, that his rescue expedition, who'd also not, because the plan didn't say anything about rescuing anyone, they hadn't gone to rescue him. So they found him another year later, because they had to actually wait for the winter to pass. So how did these guys feel about this? Well, Scott obviously thought he lost, but he also thought he lost not because of his fantastic plan, but because there were misfortunes. He'd basically been unlucky. But the funny thing is, Amundsen also didn't feel like he'd won. So what's going on here? Because in terms of winning, you'd think Amundsen would think, yay, I won. But Amundsen wasn't actually in this to get to the South Pole. Amundsen was actually on an expedition to get to the North Pole, except that he thought somebody had already reached the North Pole. And that's when he changed his plans to go and head to the South Pole. Because what he wanted to do was to prove his mastery as a polar explorer. And he basically found a whole load of challenges that would prove to himself that he was a master explorer. So he rounded the Northwest Passage. He spent loads of time trying to cross Greenland and doing a lot of these challenges in the polar area. Then he conquered the South Pole, where he was a bit surprised about the fact that he was at the absolute opposite end of the world from where he was supposed to be. And then he went again, because when he got back, he basically was in debt and he had to pay for another expedition, and people were angry at him because of this. He'd basically beaten this hero to the South Pole. So he went and had another North Pole expedition, and then another one. And it turns out that he's probably actually the first person to reach the North Pole as well, because those two expeditions that he thought had reached the North Pole later turned out to have actually faked it. So what's high performance? Well, so this is what I try and teach at companies, or to try and get across at companies. The high performance in the question is already, it's about this winning. Now, that's not really a mastery mindset. The way you can survive in this, we've just heard a talk about how complex and how quickly changing circumstances are, and that sounds really scary. But actually, it's about playing outside with your friends. It's basically quite fun when things change a bit and you can kind of adapt to the circumstances. So business agility and agility in general is much more about that adaptability and about that mindset. So the next time you're thinking about, okay, which framework and what structure and what statics do I need to actually have to be called agile or to have agility, think of these Norwegian guys who were out skiing and having fun and running their dog sled up and down to the South Pole and still having the feeling they didn't win, because mastery, you never actually win. It's all about continuously improving. So that's it. Any questions or discussion? I'm going to take this off because it's really hot. Any questions? Everybody's kind of interested?
Is this how you start when you have to go into a new organization and present your ideas? And is this what you present to them, or?
Yeah, so that's a
general idea of it.
This is what I keep in the back of my mind. It's not what I necessarily present. It really depends on the company. So sometimes you just come in and you infect the company with a bit of Scrum in the bottom, and then you leave again, and then after a couple of years you come back and, hi, I hear things with those teams going really well, but the rest of you guys, and then you can kind of introduce the mindset to the rest of the company. I've also done the zombie Scrum thing where you just say, this is the rule book, your boss says you're going to do this, so we're just going to run and then practice, and then at a certain point say, and by the way, there's these Scrum values, and there's the Agile Manifesto, there's this idea behind it, and then it kind of falls into place. And sometimes you have to kind of convince a leader, and they need to. I don't really like Agile transformations. So I try and convince the leaders, hey, look, if we can learn it all through the organization, so we Scrum our Scrum implementation, or we have an Agile approach to our Agile implementation, that'll work. So it's a kind of, it depends.
What is the biggest challenge you face in order to move
the biggest challenge? I think the biggest challenge is fear. So people go really stupid when they're scared, and I think that's probably one of the differences between Scott and Amundsen as well. So I've read all of their journals and stuff, and Scott is clearly very afraid of what this situation is. He's very afraid that he's not going to be successful, and he's got this constant gnawing fear, and that makes him make a series of bad decisions all the way down. He's also the only one making decisions. Whereas Amundsen has some cock-ups and stuff, but they kind of get around it, and they all know that they're heading for the same goal, and they trust each other. And so the fear doesn't break down the team's trust, and they keep thinking properly and learning in their situation, and just gives them a way more resilience. So I think fear is probably the I know that the change managers will say, yeah, you need to make a burning platform. Yeah, maybe, but then you need to kind of soothe everyone, say, okay, but we're all going to discover it together, and we're in the line is going up, we're growing, and we're becoming greater people, and not oh no, Google's going to come and eat our breakfast, because that's.
And just do you have an advice on how to overcome that?
Yeah, I mean, adopting this kind of continuous learning thing. I don't know, but that's very much my. So if I'm scared of something, then I often think, okay, but if I can get some sort of control over it, so you could try and get control over it by planning it really well. The only thing is that's just moving up your problem, because as soon as your plan fails, you'll say, oh my God, I don't have it under control. Whereas if you continuously learn about it, it kind of externalizes failure. So it says, okay, whether you're successful or failure is never the point. You're learning about it all the time. So actually it becomes about, okay, it failed, what can I learn? Okay, actually this was quite good that we failed, and it's quite good that we failed so soon, because then I learned from it. So I think that's the key. Yeah?
I understand it was more like a metaphor, but what it really struck me is that this guy was sure that he had the best people, right? Have the best of the best, have 60 of the brightest minds. But what actually killed him was the lack of a very simple knowledge. Like, this guy fixed the sledge by pouring some water, and I'm like, how can 60 of the most brilliant people of the time do not thought about that, right? So it might be that it's like thinking also to have the right people, and it might be that those people all think the same way.
Mm-hmm. But these people weren't working in a team. So if you read Scott's diaries, he's basically always talking about how everything comes down to him, and he has to take all the decisions. So he didn't come up with, okay, I pour water on the bottom. In fact, none of the Norwegians came up with it, and one of them said, hey, I saw some Inuit do this thing where they melt some snow. And, okay, well, let's try it. Oh, hey, actually, this is quite it. Yeah. So even there, the invention wasn't done there. So it's asking quite a lot. It's just one man here. It's not a team. Okay. Here you have the advantage that everyone's mind is focused on the problem. Here, it's only one guy, the hero. And sorry, he didn't come up with the solutions.
Okay. So it's like everyone was expecting a solution from him, basically.
Yeah.
Okay.
So why bother get the best?
Exactly.
Well, because the plan was to man-haul the sleds to the South Pole, so you need these big bears of people.
Okay.
And one of the things, in fact, in that last letter, the only person in his whole expedition mentioned in the letter is P.O. Evans, which is Petty Officer Evans, who'd been selected for the final run to the South Pole because he was so big and strong. And he actually, in the letter, puts he was very disappointed in P.O. Evans because he was very surprised that this huge man would let them down. Now later it turns out they were feeding everybody the same amount, which is about 2,000 kilocalories per person, and this guy's like, this size, eating the same, so the odds are he's going to be the first to drop, and he did.
I'm trying to
key is probably to not make it about winning. So not making it about completing the project, but saying, hey, we got this challenge, and we reckon if we do these things, but you tell me because you're the expert, but then we'll probably meet the challenge. And then you just keep changing that story as you go along because you want to meet the challenge, not actually make the thing. So that's what the difference is between the inside out and the outside in. You think, okay, we want to master our customer's problem. What is this customer, what is the challenge here? What do they want from us and how can we give that to them? And then if you're all doing that together, then that should, and you're all learning together, then that should kind of reduce the fear.
Question.
Again?
So you probably experienced. You said that you were working also in companies like Wiki.com, for instance. How do you see the business agility, present or future? You decide of Amsterdam. How do you see the new generation of entrepreneurs? How do you see the new generation of business themselves in this place?
In Amsterdam.
In Amsterdam, or
Okay.
you name it.
That's a broad question.
In terms of transformation.
Yeah. I'm not sure there's a single thing to say about that. I mean, I think the Netherlands, so if you're talking about Dutch companies,
Yeah.
then the Netherlands has a very consensus-driven kind of way of running companies, which is not necessarily a good thing. So the nice thing about consensus is that if you want everyone to agree, you know they've all agreed because you've got consensus. The problem with consensus is it takes a really long time to get consensus. And if trust is low and people are feeling fear, then you'll never get consensus. So you'll just get this kind of death state where nothing ever moves, and which is the absolute opposite of agility. But you do need consent. So the nice thing about the Dutch kind of consensus building is that it works once you've got consensus, but it just takes a seriously long time to get there sometimes. So for the Netherlands, I think the change in thinking has to be towards much more collectiveness, where you say, okay, we don't have to all agree, but can you at least consent? So that, okay, you know, would it kill you if we did this? No, okay, in that case, we'll just agree to disagree, and we'll just go in this direction for a little bit, and then if we're wrong, then we'll all say, yes, you told us so, and then we can change direction. So it's I think that would be the challenge for Dutch culture in business. If I can generalize, because this is like gross generalization.
All Dutch people are the same.
Okay, thanks very much.
Thank you. Thank you guys for your time here after work, putting effort to follow us. And this is the scratch of what we try to do. This is how we try to introduce business agility. But that doesn't mean that you don't know business agility or the Dutch reality is not introduced to the business agility. We just believe that there's a lot of space we need to cover, a lot of gaps that we need to close or reach. And I can make you sure that we will dig deeper on how you design patterns, how you design thinking, what is the best thing to do when it comes to leadership. And please follow our events in the Meta platform. Everybody's welcome to share an experience. We don't have just if you have a nice experience, a nice story to share with us, and a nice solution to provide. We would like to facilitate it, and we try to change the business world, because what best from waking up and being happy in your place. And that's all, guys. Beers, pizza, and